Recently, as a country, we've been having a bit of a debate about how exactly we should go about, and if we should go about, reenfranchising those who had served their time in prison and giving them back the right to vote, with some presidential candidates coming out in support of it, others saying we should have a conversation, some staying very much silent on the topic. And joining us now to talk about this is Right to Vote Campaign National Coordinator Amani Sawari. Welcome to the Damage Report.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Very glad to have you here. So you recently wrote an open letter to presidential candidates on voting rights, which I very much enjoyed. For those who haven't read it yet, could you explain what the case you were making was?
So the open letter is co-signed by over 70 organizations across the nation. And what we are asking is for presidential candidates to come out on their stance in favor or not in favor of restoring people's voting rights that have been impacted by incarceration. So that includes those in community custody, on probation and parole, and those who are currently incarcerated.
Okay, so I'm very glad that you described it that way, because I have to admit that while I've been talking about this a lot on this show, even I have generally restricted my commentary to referencing the people that are currently in prison. But as you point out, the population is actually larger than that, and we are talking about literally millions of people across the country. So I want to get into the argument that you're making for why they should have the right to vote. But before we get into that, because you were talking about the presidential candidates, who has actually made clear where they stand on this so far, and who are we still waiting for?
So right now, there are 3 candidates who have come out in favor, and that's Adam Kokesh of the Libertarian Party, as well as Andrew Yang and Bernie Sanders. They've all said that they are in favor of restoring voting rights for those who are on probation, parole, and incarcerated. The rest of the candidates have not made a clear stance on where they stand. Candidate Cory Booker has diverted the question. Kamala Harris has said that she is up for discussion about restoring those who are on probation and parole. But for those candidates who haven't come out, they have not yet said whether they are in favor or not.
And I wonder, I guess on some level, I don't necessarily envy the task ahead of you in trying to get them all on the record when, I mean, I saw what the sort of like on CNN and all that, the conversation that was had after Bernie Sanders was talking about this. The View, they were like viciously attacking him for coming out with a position on it. And so I wonder if other candidates have been disincentivized from actually making clear what they think about this topic.
That could be the case. I also think because it's such a dividing topic in our country, that might be one reason why they don't want to come out in favor so early. But I would really be hesitant to vote for any candidate that did not support expanding our democracy to include everyone. In the United States, our democracy has never included everyone. There's never been a point in time in our history where everyone that was a citizen could vote. So I would really urge candidates to not be hesitant about this issue and to come out in favor of expanding the number of people who can participate in the political processes that govern their lives.
So I believe it was in the letter that you talked about how the current system of how we decide who gets to vote and who still doesn't get to vote is effectively an extension of Jim Crow. Could you explain that argument for us?
Yes, so right after the slave era and during the Jim Crow era, the people who were considered slaves now had to be given a new term because the term slave was taboo. And so that new term was criminal or convict. So we were able to disenfranchise Black people just by giving them this new label of being a criminal. And then all of the rights that did not apply to slaves suddenly did not apply to criminals. So we take those rights away from people because of their status. And so when we assign a new slave status, and this is a new slave status, our Constitution has labeled people who are being prosecuted for a crime as slaves in the 13th Amendment with our exception clause. Slavery is still going on. That allows for the people who are prosecuted to be treated as such, to be treated as slaves, to not have the right to vote, to not have the freedom of movement, to not be able to participate in political conversations or be around their families. So we think that there are certain rights that a person should have as a citizen, especially if they are being affected by the laws, that they should be able to participate in voting. There is nothing that says that someone who is not participating in voting would be able to reform better, or that they would have a lower recidivism rate because they're not participating in voting. Actually, Initiate Justice just came out with a report. They launched a report this past March, I believe it was the 6th, that says that democracy needs means everyone. And it has statistics on the facts that if people are participating in democracy, if they're educating themselves civically, then that they're more inclined in coming back into society and being better citizens. And so we want to give people that option of participating in democracy. We want them to feel like they belong in our society, and that's one step in doing so. And then we also want them to have a voice and have ownership over changing their environments, over bringing in programs and having a voice in the legislation that could make a better environment for them.
And that certainly makes sense. The most divisive aspect of this conversation seems to be, over the past few weeks at the very least, people generally outside of like Republican governors in the South seem to think that being able to vote once you leave prison makes perfect sense. Although in a lot of states you still cannot. There's a lot of obstacles are set up to stop you from doing that. But the topic of voting while you are in prison tends to meet, like you can start that conversation and within 20 seconds, you're talking about the Boston bomber, you're talking about Kaczynski and stuff like that. What would you say to people who are uncomfortable with the idea that people still serving their sentence should be allowed to vote, including possibly domestic terrorists, killers, the examples that come up when this topic starts?
I think it's exciting that a lot of people have been able to get over the idea that people who have served their time and who are out in society are able to vote. And I think that we've gotten over that idea because people on the inside have been fighting so hard for their voting rights. We need to raise the bar for everyone, and that includes people on the inside. The Boston bomber and domestic terrorists represent a very small portion of the people who are locked up today. A lot of people who are locked up today are people who had drug crimes, people who are offenders because they were sufferers of trauma in their childhood, because their parents were incarcerated. These are cycles that affect families that are in poverty. A lot of the people who are inside did not ever see a bomb or know how to make bombs. So the fact that there's this one idea of who a criminal is that's really stereotyping all people who are behind bars, this is something that they suffer from often. We pick one person to represent the entire majority of the population, and then we silence and dismiss all others. So we need to think and expand our perspective of who people on the inside are. They are our fathers, our mothers, our sisters and brothers. They are people who are being affected by policy. They want a voice in the policies that affect their children and their spouses and their loved ones. They want to be able to be involved in society and shaping society and trying to shape the world for the people that they love. So this is not just domestic terrorists. It's not just murderers, though it does include those folks. It more massively includes folks that are in for crimes that we're not even talking about, like drug offenses, running away in their childhood, just cycles of poverty that have affected them. And we want to hear their voice because we want society to be better for everyone, including people who have suffered from trauma and are in prison because they're still dealing with those traumatic pasts.
Amani Sawari, Right to Vote Campaign National Coordinator, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget to become a TYT member today. For more exclusive content, join now at tyt.com/join.